bringing you all some of the latest webinars that are focused really on helping our community be able to learn more about how artificial intelligence impacts every part of our life. So with that said, we welcome you all here. I'm glad that we have a good number of attendees dropping your flag, the flags that you represent as your culture, your heritage, drop in where you're logging in from. I know we have folks coming in from different parts of the nation. And so we are super excited to welcome you back. My name is Lily Beth Genghis. I'm the CEO and co-founder of LTX Connect. And we're here really to create programming for you all. We have a newsletter, we have these webinars, we do in-person activations across with the goal to really help us come together. And especially as we have been experiencing the coming out of the pandemic, right? It's been 4 years. Slowly, we're all trying to get into our groove and hopefully also creating a new life. And with that said, this special session is really important because we want to focus on what does AI in healthcare, especially in our Latina community, look like? What are those issues we should be caring about? What should we be learning about? Especially if you're somebody who's in the medical field. What are you seeing? What areas can we be helping, whether you're also on the tech side of building that technology, but also for all of us as patients, as folks who are, we have families that are impacted by different health issues. And so I hope that we can make the next hour or so be something that we all get to learn from. And we have an amazing set of panel that we'll be introducing shortly. And your moderator for today will be Quinny Sanchez, who is passionate about improving the health and well-being of historically marginalized communities. She leverages her lived experiences as a first-gen and formerly undocumented Latina to advocate, strategize, and engage with the public health and digital health stakeholders to ensure innovative interventions are meaningful and reach in the impact of Latina communities. So please, let's give her a warm LTX Connect welcome. Hi, Quinny. Great to see you here. Excellent. So with that said, to set up really the framing for today, we're going to go ahead and share a video that comes from Consumer Reports. So Consumer Reports is a national organization that's been around for over, I believe it's over 25 years. And there's a special short films that were created to help us understand how biases show up in algorithms and data sets, and how they can result in unfair types of practices and decisions especially for people of color. These short films are directed by filmmaker Alice Gu, and we're going to show you the one that focuses on medical devices. As I mentioned earlier, we are literally about exactly 4 years since the pandemic hit. And so we know that COVID-19 really took a toll in our community, especially the Latina community. And looking at how some of the tools that we were using as the oximeter, right, how the impacts that had. And this is a tool that's been around for many years, but we know that it didn't detect patients with darker skin fairly or equally. So with that said, we'll jump right in. And this will help frame the conversation. And then I'm going to hand it over to Quinny, who's going to bring in entrepreneurs, community organizers, folks who are helping educate and really helping build some of the solutions that are really needed, especially now. So I'm going to jump right in. Any questions, comments? How you all feeling? Let's see, folks. Yeah, I'm seeing all the comments. Excellent. Great. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Give me 1 second as I do that. And then once the video is complete, we'll go ahead and hand it over to Quinny.
Counties that are majority Black have 3 times the rate of infections, 6 times the rate of death. Something is going on here.
Information out from the White House last night on which coronavirus patients are suffering the worst outcome. A small medical device can help patients monitor their oxygen levels at home.
They talk about the blue collar, white collar divide here.
After you recognize that skin color could affect these values, then you kind of feel a little dumb that you didn't think about it before. At the University of Michigan, our patient demographics are historically about 80% white, about 10% Black. In that early COVID pandemic, that demographic just flipped. We were routinely placing these catheters in people's arteries so that we could check their arterial blood frequently. There was a mismatch between someone's pulse oximeter values and the blood we were getting from their artery. And what a pulse oximeter is a device that measures how much light is transmitted across your fingertip. And so by measuring how much light comes across, we can say, okay, this person has 98% of their blood that's oxygenated, because without it, we would have to sample someone's arterial blood to know what their oxygen level is. And we use this technology so frequently that that we depend on it. The care that we provide depends on the quality of the data we receive. But some parts of data that we use all the time, whether it's your vital signs, heart rate, your blood pressure, and nowadays your oxygen saturation is considered kind of a gold standard piece of data that we use and just believe. At first, we thought it was maybe just a COVID problem, right? We thought, hey, there's something unique about COVID where it's causing this mismatch. It was the fact that we were taking care of suddenly so many Black patients and they were having this mismatch. There have been a handful of studies that have demonstrated clear harm to Black patients as a result of inaccuracies in pulse oximetry. Black patients had higher risk of death due to these pulse oximetry.
So as science technology studies, people call it a socio-technical system of the society that you're using it in, who's building it, who's using it on whom. Then you can see much more clearly how this kind of thing can amplify societal inequities and not fix them.
We're at a pivotal moment. We have an opportunity to correct the wrongs that have already been made in the first several decades of technology's innovation. And if left unchecked, we will continue to, I think, exacerbate inequality, lead to increased polarization, and the technology creation, the products, and the ideas will be concentrated only among a select few, which will not serve our entire global population.
One in three medical students believes that that Black patients experience less pain or experience pain differently. Even today, there's this baseline assumption that there are these huge differences between different racial and ethnic groups. And a lot of times it's like modern medicine looks to try to quantify them instead of asking the real question, which is, do they even exist?
Increasingly, we're recognizing that a lot of the tools we use every day are rooted in data that are both very old and very racist. The regulatory approval of pulse oximeters, more than likely the individuals who they were tested on, healthy subjects, were predominantly white men.
So right now, through FDA, Food and Drug Administration is the body that handles like regulation of these AI and these medical devices that use AI, and they suggest doing tests of racial and ethnic bias, but do not require it as part of the clearance or approval process for these devices.
There are many possible different definitions of discrimination or unfairness. Some of them conflict with each other. The first one I always ask is one group experiencing a positive outcome at a higher or lower rate than another group?
If certain people aren't allowed to ask certain questions in their research and in their development of tech can't be objective and can't be unbiased as a result.
We need to make sure that when these devices come out, that they are regulated in some way, in a correct way that takes into account a diverse group of people.
We need to start from the roots, and we need to think about the funding and the reason, the motivation that we're creating this thing for, right?
We don't know what we don't know. And it requires a lot of light bulbs to go off to be able to root out all of these problems for medicine.
Thank you all so much for watching that. I know it's for especially, it's a very difficult topic, right? Because I know taking the moment now to also just honor the folks and especially the family members that maybe were impacted. So I want to make sure we acknowledge that. And as was said in the video, we don't know what we don't know, but we do know that there's a lot of important research and data that show how some of these data that's been collected can impact our communities in different manners. So with that said, to help us guide in this important conversation, I'm going to hand it over to the experts. So I'm going to hand it over to Queenie and the rest of the panel to guide us through. And if you all are seeing right now some polls, we want to get a feel for where you're all at with this topic, especially around AI, especially looking around healthcare as well. And one of the reasons you're here, so then that way we can help create future ones for you all. So with that said, I'm going to hand it over to Queenie. Queenie, you're the star now. I'll hand it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Lily. And hi, everyone. Again, I'm Queenie Sanchez Lopez, she, her, and I'm based out of Durham, North Carolina. So I see a ton of North Carolina folks on this call and just represent like we are here. I know a lot of folks are like, there's Latinos in North Carolina. Yes, we are here and we are at these amazing institutions learning great things. And so one thing that I do within the healthcare ecosystem is really amplify Latina voices, like folks that are creating solutions at the intersection of health and technology. And what I want to do today is I'm going to bring on our panel. We have Carlos, Gerald, and Oriana. I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves, and we're going to go in alphabetical order. And so what I'm going to ask them to do is introduce themselves, what flags they represent. I know that's a loaded question, but like, give me all your flags. Like, are you Team Jacob? Are you, I'm Team Mexico, you know? So, and then I also want y'all to give us a little bit more context about what you do in healthcare or how you impact healthcare. And then your one sentence stance on AI. So that's a lot, but stick with me. And we're going to pass it on to Carlos first.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Quinny. Thank you, everyone, for being here. My name is Carlos Rodarte, and I'm the co-founder and partner of Colectivo Health and the co-founder and CEO of Veritios, a mental health care navigation company. I start businesses, I start companies, and I'm a fierce advocate of patient rights when it comes to accessing their medical data and navigating their own care. In terms of flags, this can get contentious pretty fast, so I think I'll just keep it nationality-wise. Mexico is a key flag. I was born in Little Mexico in Southern California, and I'll leave it at that for now. In terms of my views, my brief views on AI, I think that it's just really important to have a great deal of humility with how we imagine both the positive and negative potential of AI. And we specifically create space for asking ourselves the question of, what are the conditions and causes that make AI possible? And have really penetrating answers that include the environmental impacts, the worker impact, really the whole supply chain, to see the interconnectedness of it all and not view AI as this disconnected thing that will solve problems for everyone. So I think just really having a dose of humility, but also optimism for what can be improved. So thank you, Quinny. And again, look forward to the discussion, and I'll pass it on to fellow panelists. Thank you.
All right, Gerald, you're up.
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Gerald Pierce Iturrios. I'm originally from La Isla del Encanto, Puerto Rico. I am the co-founder and CEO of Trustable. We are a responsible AI governance software company that helps many industries, but amongst healthcare organizations, companies in health tech, pharma, medical devices, hospital systems, providers, really to help them operationalize responsible AI strategies and be able to comply with regulations impacting AI. So going from saying that they're doing the right things about AI to actually doing them and proving that they're doing the right things around AI. I think with respect to my one sentence around AI, we consider ourselves AI pragmatists. I think, at the very core, we should evaluate the benefits, evaluate the risks to each stakeholders, and then we weigh those benefits and those risks together. And, if one surpasses the other, it's ethical. And if it isn't, it's not ethical. It's pretty simple. So I'll pass it to Oriana.
Great. This feels almost set up because I'm actually a bit of a cynic in this world. So we've had the optimist, now we have the pragmatist, and I'll come in as the cynic. So that'll be fun to share sort of why I think that's the case. And so my quick background is I am Peruvian American. I went to international school in Lima before moving back to the US. I am building my second company, which is called Mika Health. We use machine learning and AI to automate healthcare supply chain so that we can help really reduce the cost of care, reduce operational burden on clinicians and administrators in hospitals, and also reduce the immense environmental waste that materials and supplies in the healthcare system have on our planet. My background is I was an investment banker for a little while. I've coded since I was very young. So I actually went to graduate school for machine learning and spent some time kind of focused on, I've always spent some time focused on like data and really passionate about finding, what I think is undigitized information that is valuable and making it digital and available. My previous company actually operated in Latin America. I ran an automated background check company that still exists and conducts Uber's background checks in 10 countries in the region. So that is my background. And my quick cynical view on AI is that I think the way that it's being treated and built around these days is a little like irresponsible and hypey. I think there are like really great use cases in healthcare, and I would like to see more of them. I see a lot of kind of like chat GPT with makeup on instead of like really tangible use cases that can support operational things. Machine learning has been used for a long time to do things like cancer detection, for example, based off of images. I think those are incredibly excellent use cases of machine learning and AI. But I do think that a lot of the other things that are being done a little irresponsibly, kind of following the hype cycle in the venture community. So so you've got I guess 3 different takes, maybe 3 different attitudes, and so we found to share those as we go.
Thank you. Thank you all. And Oriana, I think low key, we're all a little cynical about it, but we're trying to find the optimism in it. I know I am. I've been at South by Southwest for the past week, and the past 3 days have been all AI and technology. And there was some VR stuff earlier too. And I think for the longest time, I was really resistant to AI because it's like, it's going to take over, like it's not really connected to us. People are using it irresponsibly, but there are like really good use cases for how it can benefit our health. And so I do want to make sure we are looking at like the positives while also considering like where is the system like really failing folks and where do we need to like pay attention to. So going back to those flags, like where are the red flags, where are the green flags? So I want to start off with those green flags. I want to take a moment just to consider the ways in which AI has the potential to enhance our health, and particularly for the Latina community. I know that our community a lot of times has like language access barriers. There's folks with different documentation status. And then even without considering that, like there are folks that just like have a long line of inequity in their family's healthcare lineage. Can each of you paint me a picture of your ideal use case for how AI can support the Latinx community? Once again, we'll start off with Carlos.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Quinny. Big question. And I think I'll take my own advice with expressing a dose of humility and kind of painting these rosy scenarios from my vantage point. And my perspective is just that. So I invite everyone to sort of develop their own point of views around this and be part of that global discussion. When I kind of close my eyes and I recall conversations like with my mom or family members or friends, there's so many questions around like, is this normal? Like, ¿es normal, mami, esto? No, sí. And it's just one of those things where there's always that hesitation that, are you getting the best possible care? Are you seeing the best possible specialist? Were the right test ordered for you? Was that normal? There's so many open questions that exist around that experience that go beyond any one ethnicity and nationality. But I think they're far more pronounced in the Latinx community as I see it, as I've lived it. And I think this sort of care navigation, care companion, advocacy, justice kind of mindset tool can really help, contextualize what is happening through all aspects of care, from diagnoses to kind of long-term follow-up, and just really grounded in what is normal and what is not, and prepare the psychology and emotional profile of the family unit that's seeking that care. So I think that with the right data and the right intention, there's no reason why that shouldn't be possible. But is it possible today? No.
I may want to get a little nuanced here in how I respond to this. So there's kind of 3 areas in general that I see AI playing an important role in healthcare: on the administrative side, on the clinical side, and on the research side. We know different use cases amongst each of these 3, right? On the admin side, which I think is an enormous opportunity, transcription of doctor's notes, automating tasks and reminders, reducing costs on the administrative side, really critical. On the clinical side, lots of risks for sure, but if done right, can actually help predict future outcomes and recommend treatments and things like that. On the research side, we've seen some of the impact of things like AlphaFold on protein folding and other types of drug discovery programs that I think are really critical and important. One way in which I want to describe a little bit of the nuance is we talk about AI kind of as a broad level technology, but it actually has a lot of subdomains, right? ChatGPT is a version of a large language model, which in itself is a neural network. There's different types of techniques around computer vision and natural language processing and broader machine learning capabilities and so forth. I think we need to understand that there are some tools that are effective for some things and some things that are not. Large language models are general purpose systems that are not great with specialized tasks. The more that we can specialize these models to take into account specific demographic differences or specific attributes of the environment, the lifestyle, the genetics of the individuals or the patients whom they're looking at, that's where I would probably play an important role. Why I'm optimistic about this? Well, actually, I still sit in the middle, but one of the areas that makes me excited about these applications, particularly as it relates to the Latino community, is that I think we're talking about the risks earlier in the life cycle of this technology relative to other technologies that we've deployed in the past, relative to the internet, relative to the computer, or social media, or whatever. And I think that means that the responsibility by design element here, right? How it's designed, developed, deployed, and monitored, generally speaking, not always the case, should be, or actually it should be, but isn't always being, let's say, governed by a diverse set of stakeholders, evaluating and testing its impact. And I think that's fundamentally the one area that I see that now is changing. I think organizations that are developing and deploying these systems are recognizing it, and they're trying to do something about it. I think that doesn't get covered in the media a lot because the media loves to pay attention to Google Gemini going woke. But in general, there's still, a lot of very positive applications of how orgs are designing and implementing these systems, which oftentimes is actually happening a lot slower than people think as well.
Awesome. Love that take. I think if I think about ideal use case, I think of how to unsilo a lot of the breadth of information that the healthcare system has. And so, of course, like everybody's unique, but then there's patterns and different, groups of people exposed to different things, different family histories. And so I think one of the reasons healthcare has failed a lot of maybe like marginalized communities, women, is that of course there isn't data, there aren't studies. And I think now with a big push with AI and sharing more open data, there is an incentive for hospitals to begin to say, like, how do we work with each other? How do we share this information and start drawing better understanding of healthcare and disease across broader populations? And so I think that's an ideal use case of being able to see population health more globally, and instead of just the local population health, where you have health systems really look at mapping like just their county or just their, their city. And so you maybe have, for marginalized communities, you have smaller samples inevitably because of that. And so being able to, I think an ideal use case is being able to access all of that information, get more global understanding of people. And so that's definitely incredibly important in the case of like women and women's health. I'm not sure if anybody's read Invisible Women. I encourage everybody to read it if you have not. It does really in-depth discussion of how the world, and from a data perspective, is just not constructed for women in many ways, even to the point where uniforms for women in the military aren't made for women, and therefore they have more accidents in these kinds of jobs, which is awful. And you have things like even like how chemicals are designed in cleaning supplies aren't designed for like the thickness of the skin of women, and who tends to be in cleaning staff in a lot of places tends to be women of color. And so being able to have a more global understanding of who our populations are and how they're affected, I think has great potential for AI. I also completely agree with what Gerald said around like use the right tool for the right use case. There's if you think about how how forecasting is used and how these different models are used. Like people spend a lot of time picking the right model for the right problem. And so now we're seeing large language models applied to everything, but truly a lot of the effort that is spent by researchers or data modelers is finding the right model that will produce the right outcome that will tune to the problem. So if you're looking at something that's over time, you should be using a time series model. If your data is something that is clustered, you shouldn't be using something like that. It'll just render incorrect results. And so I think as people become more and more educated on these different models, like LLMs have become so prominent. And so hopefully it opens up people's curiosity into some of these other models and understanding that they need to be used differently. There's a different model for different problem and different tuning. And so over time, hopefully it'll be more nuance, more granularity on how people are solving those problems.
I love that. And in a lot of ways that feeds into our next question. This component of like the data that you have that's gonna reflect how much impact that you can make. I was reading up on this Mexican startup that's essentially trying to like improve access to health insurance. And what they were doing was that they were collecting like demographic information about like all different types of people in Mexico. In Mexico, like there's racism. And so like you still have to consider like the different races and like even like the different ¿cómo se llama? The dialects and genders. And so when you do have that complete data set, like you are able to deliver a solution that can benefit multiple people and like really decrease access to, increase access to resource or decrease inequities.
Yeah, it's an interesting, sorry to cut you off. I think it's like an
No, I was
interesting
gonna pass
topic right now, especially, I think the census is coming up and there's always, I'm not sure if anybody here has filled out the census and not felt identified by the census, especially Latin Americans are extremely diverse. They come from a lot of really mixed backgrounds. And so I remember feeling like, I think maybe the 2021, like the pandemic one, and looking at it for a while and not feeling like I was seen by the New York City census, which you think would be more comprehensive or understanding of the local population. I think Latin America has a big problem from that perspective, reflecting what you just said, like how different populations are. There's a lot of economic inequality, and businesses are built on models of the data that is out there. And so fintech models in Mexico, for example, I remember because I've operated in the Latin region for a long time. And I was part of sort of like that tech ecosystem for several years. A fintech founder a few years ago told me that the best predictor for like sending loans out to people was the zip code of the buyer's parents. And so imagine like of the borrower's parents. So imagine training data off of that. And so you just like reinforce the inequality of what's already embedded in the data. People just assume, okay, let's just go off of zip code of people's parents, and you are going to shut off a huge amount of the population from access to capital. And so healthcare will become has the potential to, it already is kind of similar, the way health insurance is done, the way these models are set up. And so I think a big part of what needs to change is also the nuanced understanding of who everybody is, particularly Latin America. I think Latin America is very misunderstood globally by the US, even within Latin America, of like the races, the ethnicities, the backgrounds of all the people. Not to get political here, but I do think that's going to be has been a big miscalculation from both sides, honestly, of like, who is the Latino population in the US? Where do they come from? When they came to the US, why they came to the US is extremely varied. And people just treat, I think, Hispanic population as just one voting population that thinks about it the same way. And it varies very dramatically from state to state, from generation to generation. And I think that misunderstanding is going to be really challenging politically, socially, and what is an increasingly significant part of the US population is going to behave and purchase and need health and need care. So I started going on a tangent there, but I think it's an important part.
You gave your answer to question two, and I'm going to pass it. Let's go work backwards. To Gerald, what else is needed for the Latina community to have equitable outcomes? And not just equitable, but safe. Like, is it safe right now for Latinas to be accessing inputs or sources that are capturing their information through AI? So what is needed for that to be true, for safety and equity?
You know, it kind of starts by holding folks accountable, isn't it? By holding the actual organizations that are developing and deploying these systems in which Latinos are engaging with. It starts by holding government responsible for making sure that they have a coherent regulatory structure to address AI issues, like we saw with the FDA in the video. It also means, around equity, that we have to further educate ourselves to make sure that we understand the technology and that we understand potential risks and benefits of it. So I think it actually starts at the very minimum with accountability. I think one area around equity that I don't necessarily think that we talk enough about is this issue of like explainability. Oftentimes, individuals are interacting with AI systems, number one, without knowing that they're interacting with some version of an AI system, which is a disclosure problem, but also not understanding why it's being used or where it has the potential to be used. So we often talk about explainability, the notion of, explaining how an AI system is designed, what data is going into it, how it reached a conclusion, an outcome, and output. But the reality is that explainability is often tailored for a technical audience, right? I actually prefer the term understandability. It's kind of quirky, and I don't want to invent yet another AI term, but there's plenty of those. But this helps us focus on ensuring that we use plain language that people understand when interacting with the system. Oftentimes, part of equity is lack of understanding. And so if we can tailor the language that's used to describe these systems in ways that are effective for everyone, I think that's really where one of the missed opportunities for equity is. I'll give you an example. Oriana, you may want to keep me honest here because I don't remember the exact details, but there was a report a few years ago of essentially how transparency in AI systems actually decreased trust in the healthcare setting. So to give you an example, let's say that you are interacting with a doctor and you're interacting with an AI system, and they both give you a clinical recommendation. It is exactly the same. You ask the AI system, what data or what information did you use to reach this conclusion? The AI system is not a black box. It's perfectly open. It tells you exactly what it used to make that decision. The doctor doesn't. You actually end up trusting the doctor more than you end up trusting the AI system, because the more that information that system provided, the more you're actually able to question whether that data that was actually included is correct or not correct. And so this all goes back to, oftentimes even transparency itself is not a solution to equity. And so I think the topic of understandability and helping organizations or helping individuals really understand the types of systems that they're engaging with, how they're reaching conclusions, I think that's really the part of the education that we need to do across the board.
Thanks, Gerald. Yeah, that's huge. I think one thing that's really interesting about just the Latina perspective, or the first gen or immigrant perspective, I met somebody who's Ghanaian, but they live in like Amsterdam, and they broke down the metaverse in a way that like somebody who first was introduced to it could understand, or has no concept for the metaverse. And I think as immigrants or first gens, like our job, especially with our parents, is to be cultural translators. So we're consistently interpreting systems, interpreting language, our patterns. And I think what you're speaking to is a really good place for us to be poised in, is like, yeah, if we understand it, like, let's help guide the folks who need to know how it works. So I really love that perspective, and just wanted to chime in that like we're good for that. Okay, Carlos, you're up. And I think, Carlos, one thing I would really, you have an answer already planned. I would also really love to get your perspective as a community, like somebody that's like deeply rooted in the community, like your hands and feet like are consistently like with providers, you're engaged, like what does this mean for you?
Yeah, no, I think I do a lot of work in kind of the community kind of health center setting, and oftentimes there isn't a lot of analytics staff, or resources are constrained, and I see some missed opportunities to kind of really help bring in the best possible care across low wealth communities. But I think what's also really interesting is I just want to reflect back that sometimes we can create what we think is the best tool with the best data and the most sanitized labeling that works really well. And we can look at all of us research, and for the first time really For those that provided genomic data sets, over 50% of them were from non-Europeans. So I think, we can have the best possible data, but that doesn't mean that when that tool is used within the social construct of healthcare, it's going to be used appropriately and equitably. Because at the end of the day, care is personal, and care variance happens in less than ideal circumstances, from those that can be outright racist to those that can just be dismissive. So I think having the tool is one thing, using it appropriately is another. But I also want to underscore this part around understandability, or that Gerald, you mentioned. I think we know that in other industries, like if you get denied for a home loan, there's now legislation, across the U.S. saying, hey, you should be told that, your decision or this outcome was a result of an AI system, and it was semi-automated or fully automated. I think that the side effects of AI-driven care can be very pronounced. Quinny, as you mentioned, is we're going through that cultural translation, but it's also that translation of what type of care you're using. So I think that as I reflect back on what I'm seeing is already a really large discrepancy between who is having a conversation around AI, who is building, in what settings they're being deployed, and who is benefiting already. And it's really taking a top-down model, not a bottom-up model, that starts with the masses and the need and what I consider to be the right intent. So I think that we need to bring in more diverse viewpoints, environmental scientists, biologists, of which I am both of those, anthropologists, artists, that are really forcing the discussion around AI. So I think it's not just a health equity issue, it's how we're going to be in the world as the world becomes a bit more seamless.
Yeah, that brings a really good point. I was just thinking of like my mom probably has never even heard of the term AI, and it's directly impacting her. And if you ask her what is AI, she's going to be like, ¿Quién está ahí? ¿Quién ahí? ¿Quién está ahí? Like, who's there? And I think going back to that point of like, it's still impacting her. I know that there are like a variety of thought leaders that are working towards advocating for patient rights, and in the sense of like AI, like our information is going into these databases and we don't even know it. Like my mom, like through like using her patient portal, like they're capturing her information, and there's this aspect, and Edith I'm gonna ask our folks to really respond to it, but like there's this component of like patient rights. And so it's like, how do you translate that again, or interpret that in a way that like our folks are going to understand, like not just intellectually, but like it's really going to resonate with them of like, this is actually impacting my life in a way beyond the clinical wall. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to pass it back to y'all, because I know there's a lot of folks on this call that like they're hearing things for the first time, or they're like, you're telling them things that they've heard many times, and they're like, how do I get involved? How can we like really activate? Like, do I need to go get my master's in machine learning? Like, how do I advocate in a clinic or with my representative? So I'd love to hear from y'all, and we'll start again with Carlos, of where, in what ways can participants on this call and other folks in the Latinx community work to ensure that AI benefits our community?
I would say that for those that are here and will be watching this later, if you're here and watching this, you're already involved. And I saw some of the poll results, and I think that just being part of the discussion, is really important. I would offer that you don't have to be technical or have a PhD in machine learning to be part of the discussion and to understand the implications. I think this is really one that requires a great deal of diverse perspective. For example, as you start thinking about the supply chain of how data is labeled, the trauma that people that are labeling, the data in ex-US countries, the harm that's being caused. Oftentimes what we receive in AI models is very processed, very sanitized, but there's a whole supply chain that's led to this. And there's a number of cost and unintended consequences. Who right now is really on the megaphone saying, hey, are we talking about, the impact of potable water on cooling the servers of, all of the machine learning that's happening and how that's impacting the 4 billion people in the world that don't have access to clean, drinkable water? This is all related. And I think that my advice, if I'm inclined to even call it that, is to really understand what you're doing already, what profession you're in, what you're already studying, and seeing how does automation and how does new technology and how does social advancements factor in to people's ability to create a livelihood for themselves and move up the social strata. So I think that these are really important topics for me. You can probably gather this from the way that I'm communicating it, but I think that we need way more diversity that goes far beyond just skin color and nationality.
Yeah, I agree with everything Carlos had to say. I think it was really well said. Maybe I would probably go back to the 3 stakeholder groups that I talked about earlier, government, organizations, and ourselves. I think we need to expect more of our elected officials to ensure that they are properly educated on the subject, that they're proactive about its potential impacts, both positive and negative. I think we all, generally speaking, work or are in the process of working at organizations that are evaluating or even deploying these systems. They need to make sure that they have a diverse representation of how these systems are designed and developed, and diverse in every way possible. And I think as individuals, we have the obligation to get educated, right? Take an online course, participate in, ethics discussions inside of your organization. I think, one of the really critical value adds that I'm seeing now is because so many of the challenges of AI are socio-technical, liberal arts majors are starting to come up as really critical in this discussion because they're having conversations around ethics, they're having conversations around the humanity aspect of a lot of these things. And so I think, for those of you that are in liberal arts and want to play a more, important role in this conversation, I'm seeing that a lot of organizations are very open and know that they need more expertise in this camp.
Oh, that's a great call. It makes me think a little about my previous company where we were handling background checks. And so there's a lot of social implications. We were limiting people's access to jobs based on, criminal records. And so we had to do a lot of thinking around like, what did that mean for our company and like us as almost the decision maker in some cases not so much, of who has access to a job as an Uber driver in a different country, and like what is where does like a criminal record, what is the balance between societal safety and somebody being able to access a role based on like a mistake maybe they made when they were young. And so we spent a lot of time thinking around ethics. We even ended up writing an internal ethics policy at some point. This was years ago, because we were using not necessarily AI, but we're using like, software and some automated models, some automated decision making based on some heuristics. And so honestly, that's a lot of what AI is. It's automated decision making based on heuristics, right? And so I think for everybody here, what I perceive from what's happening, and especially with these immense amount of people going into this world, is that it feels like this black box with this immensely intelligent technology that nobody understands. Realistically, a lot of it is really, it's forecasting models, it's automated decision making, it's stuff that all of you have encountered. It's how your credit card rating gets done. It's how your recommendations for whatever you're going to order on Seamless, or your recommendations for products on Amazon. You're exposed to this in so many ways, and they truly are just different ways of taking data and making a decision off of it. And so online courses, definitely great. Like Coursera, Andrew Ng's like intro course to like machine learning is it's been out there for years. It's very accessible. But honestly, like just going into it and thinking about like, where do I already encounter this, and trying to take those use cases. I think looking at the financial services world is actually an amazing place to understand how healthcare might go, which is good and bad. And I think the financial services world has also used models and machine learning and AI for a really long time. And I see healthcare and health tech in a very similar place to where fintech was 15 years ago. And so there's an opportunity now with more awareness of like, what are these models going to do? And they have similar consequences. I think decisions on people's healthcare, decisions on people's finances and livelihood are like very impactful on your life and the life of your families. And so looking what's happened there and like what are the lessons of things that haven't been done well in the financial services world, I think can help inform how we should make better decisions in our healthcare world, because there's a lot of mistakes that were made there. And that's like had profound consequences on people's access to capital, to credit, to student loans, and all these other things that inform our day-to-day existence. And so encourage everybody to not just think of AI right now, especially these days, is like a lot around language models. And I think what's happened is that it's massified. And so it's giving people this, ooh, I can touch this thing now and interact with it moment. But it's been in our lives for a very long time. And so really understanding that all these models are out there and kind of thinking of how they can be around in day to day and educating yourselves and your teams and talking about the ethics of the data that your company maybe you don't use AI, but maybe you do some forecasting and some automated decision making with software. That's still something that's impacting your users and the people that you're working with and the patients if you're working in health.
Those were great responses. So y'all heard it here. Start where you are. Like, where is AI impacting you in your day-to-day? Learn more about that. Yeah, and I really liked that input, Oriana, on like the fintech space. Like, I had not connected the two. So that makes me like want to have like cross-sector conversations with fintech and healthcare folks. But we have a lot of questions, and I want to make sure that we are making space and time for that. So folks, if you haven't plugged them into the Q&A section yet, please feel free to type your questions in there. But I'm gonna read the questions out loud, and then whoever feels most comfortable answering, please have a go at it. The first question that we have, I'm gonna combine these two, is what are the current laws protecting patient rights, and how are we currently holding institutions accountable? Gerald, I think this is you.
Yeah, I mean, I can answer a little bit of that. So I will say, obviously, the US does not have a federal level regulatory mandate for AI specifically. What it is doing is applying existing laws and regulations that might have implications to AI and trying to drive enforcement in that way. A good example here is privacy, right? You know, HIPAA is ever present in the world of healthcare. Obviously, data feeds AI systems. I think what the FDA and others are trying to do is essentially trying to use HIPAA as an existing mechanism of enforcement and driving privacy violations in the use of AI for this particular case. I think we have seen, you know, some, let's call it voluntary commitments that have come as of the last, year or so. We saw the U.S. executive order launched last year. Those are not really super strong commitments, but I think it's fair to say that regardless of whether a system or a human discriminates or breaks the law, the organization is going to be held accountable. And so I think all existing laws and regulations around healthcare that may or may not be impacted by AI will likely be enforced. The challenge is really on the enforcement. I think there's one question on how do we increase accountability? Increase the fines. If you violate, HIPAA, it shouldn't be a $5 million fine. It should be a $500 million fine. And so I think if we really understand that, deterrence comes out of, economic incentives, then I think government holding organizations accountable is likely the best way to deter negative behavior. And we've seen this in financial services, right? In financial services, you can't act on insider trading. You'll get fined, get put to jail, and you just can't do it. And it's deterred, for the most part, many people from doing insider trading. And so I think if the fines are large enough, it'll deter, bad actions. And so I think one area of enforcement is increasing fines and resourcing the enforcement of these existing laws, and obviously new laws that are unique to AI.
Money motivates people, you know? Unfortunately, if we have to start somewhere, like if it's people's pockets, like let's start there. Hopefully, eventually over time, like they'll actually make those changes out of moral and ethical reasoning.
Yeah, I mean, and sorry to interrupt, you also run the counter of, for example, because oftentimes doctors are so motivated against litigation, they want to protect themselves against liability, then they start overprescribing and that creates also a negative incentive. So I don't have the answer for what, the right incentive is, but I do know that it has to be an economic incentive that drives those folks that are making decisions on behalf of patients to make sure that they have, the right outcomes in mind.
Thanks, Gerald. Next question that we have is from Felix. Okay, so there are several companies that are already doing health-related things, whether it's digital health or med tech, and they're using GPT-4, which is like the upgraded version of ChatGPT or other generative AI systems. How do employees within those companies hold those companies accountable to ensure that the product has accurate and equitable outputs? I need a volunteer.
I can take this one and then I won't take any other because I feel this is relevant to me. Look, I think it starts with governance, right? Part of the mission of Trustable is to really help provide tools and insights for organizations to actually be able to govern a lot of these systems. When we think about governance and accountability of AI, we generally tend to divide it into 3 different layers: organizational governance, use case governance, and data governance or model governance, excuse me. At the organizational level, you have these policies and these procedures and these things that enterprises and hospital systems and whatnot need to do to make sure that they're taking into account, responsible AI. You've got the use case level governance, right? So this is, you can use ChatGPT to summarize a news article or a medical record. They're dramatically different risks, even though it might be the same model or even the same prompt. And then you've got obviously your model level governance and the data that's feeding into it. I think an effective way to hold, organizations accountable is to make sure that there are committees that are set up, that there are processes and policies that are enforced, distributed, well understood. Your organizations are properly trained. You know where AI is being used, how it's being used, why it's being used. You've done, safety testing and research to understand, if it is a high risk system that has a potential of impacting, communities of color or different demographics, that you've done a lot of that testing and that you've done traditional risk management and compliance. Oftentimes the work is not super sexy, but, ensuring responsible AI actually means getting your internal ducks in a row. And so channels to make sure that your systems are accuracy and equitability of outputs and models. It depends on the models that we're talking about, right? Like LLMs are going to naturally hallucinate. That's what they're designed to do. It's actually impossible to not hallucinate. It's part of their design. Statistical models, other types of systems, I think a little less so. So it ultimately depends on what models we're talking through. But I think it really starts with holding the organizations that we're talking with and participating with and employed with, holding them accountable for showing their work and actually doing it.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Okay, I'm going to read this one. It's from Monica. I've seen a trend participating at healthcare tech hackathons that participants who are not from underrepresented communities are looking for good business ideas as opposed to improving health for underrepresented communities. How do you navigate the need for funding a tech solution while remaining true to improving healthcare services through tech? Knowing that someone is going to make money from the data of underrepresented communities discourages me from sharing my community experience and data.
A tough question, but I think there's a couple different things to unpack in that question. So one of them is, how do you get more probably underrepresented founders to lead these institutions is an important one. And so going to get on my soapbox and talk about the funding gap, but I think it's an important topic here, right? And so people of color, women don't get funded at the same degree in venture capital to start companies, and they might have better perspective. And so how do you change that? There's a few different ways to change that. One of them is if you are in a position where you can angel invest and support an underrepresented founder in your network, do it, even if it's like a couple $1,000s and if it's within your capabilities, like it makes such a difference to go out and fundraise for a company if anybody has already given you money and believes in you. It's an abysmal difference. And so I also run a community called Women in Health Tech. So this is something I talk about a lot. And so women writing angel checks to other women makes a huge difference. And if these companies can thrive and continue to exist, I think that's true for founders that are also underrepresented in the community. In terms of sharing your data, it's a tough one. I really think that everybody should be sharing their data. And what I mean by that is that that's really how we solve diseases, if we could have all of the information, but it would be put together in a way that is productive, right? I think that unfortunately, the way the health insurance industry is set up in the US makes it really challenging. And I don't know if that's like a policy perspective or like a voting perspective. Another book that I encourage people to read is called The Healing of America, and it compares the US healthcare system to 6 or 7 other countries. And it just doesn't talk about getting rid of for-profit health insurance companies as the problem, because there are other healthcare systems that are more functional that do have that model. It's a little different though. So understanding like why our healthcare system works the way it works and how your data is used is important. But I do think some companies are doing better work at like incorporating healthcare data. How do we keep it anonymous? How do we keep it private and safe? And so looking for those startups and maybe engaging some of those in conversation is a good way as well.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. We are at time. I'm just going to ask our panelists one favor. If you have one resource to share with folks, please type that into the into the chat. I don't know if folks are going to be able to see that, but I'm going to pass it on to Lily. She's going to give us instructions on what's coming next. So thank you all so much.
Thank you all so much. And let's give a special shout out to Quinny for really guiding the conversation. Thank you so much, Oriana, Gerald, and Carlos. I learned so much from this conversation. I know that the folks as well, from those Q&A questions that were just so packed, and especially for the folks who are wondering, so what happens next? Well, the opportunity is that we get to relive this experience on demand. So for the folks that want to, continue to dive into certain topics, we'll be able to share an email with the resources as well, that we all are able to continue the learning lesson. You could also share it with friends who maybe couldn't attend, or folks that you want to get plugged in. And our next AI webinar will focus on the intersection of AI and the creator economy and entertainment and media. As we've seen the headlines and how that's changing, we'll be diving more into that side. So we hope that you all can join us. And just quick to close it out, I really love this conversation of, especially Quinny, as you said, what does your mom think about this, right? And I think about my mom as well. And my mom is really who I started having these conversations. She has diabetes, and she's been impacted a lot with these different technologies as well. So I know for a lot of us, this isn't just about learning, but it's also personal to help our communities. So I just want to thank you all for just really helping us learn more about the different types of technologies, especially understanding the different data models for different problems with different tunings that Ariana shared, the important role of holding companies, our government accountable so they can protect their civil rights, have governance, be able to also hold our companies. We're working inside of these tech companies to help them encourage to have values and ethics as into what they're developing. And of course, with community, sin comunidad no hay nada. So, but I just want to thank everyone here. And we're going from here, learning together. And I just really encourage you all to stay engaged. And with that, we'll close it out. And I just want to thank you everyone for joining, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye. Take care.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.